Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, Rameumptom Ruminations. My name is Scott, and I'm the host. Today's episode is called Doubt is Not the Enemy to Faith. Thanks for coming back to listen to another episode. The subject today that we'll discuss in just a sec here is a reframing of the concept of doubt. There's many things that we've been taught as members of the LDS faith that doubt is, and I don't think I strongly disagree with the framing of the LDS Church about the concept of faith, and that's what we're going to dig into today. I want to read through a couple of comments that I got from the previous episode. The comment section got a little spicy on a few of the from a few people, but well, I'll just read a few of these. In the discussions that we've been going over for the last few weeks, it's been about being non-judgmental in our conversations with believing family and friends, and being compassionate, trying to find that compassion, which can be very, very difficult. The listener, Renee Nolan, 3163 said, compassion is possible. I keep trying, but sadness over the loss of connection that we had for 50 years prevails in my heart. I really wish he was more compassionate and less judgmental. But like you said, it is what it is. I need to find joy now. It was a short comment, but I loved it because it was full of an emotion that I think many of us experience, a sadness at the loss of relationships that we've had, a willingness, at least on my part, and I would like to assume on many of your parts, a willingness to continue that relationship, even though it looks different. And that can be so hard to navigate. There's another comment that I'll read. Top Brent said, great episode. I wish this generous attitude could be the prevailing sentiment in and out of the church. Unfortunately, most folks just move from groupthink of tribalism A to the groupthink of tribalism B. A response to that, Count Kolob said, agreed. I always say you can usually tell what type of Mormon someone was by the type of ex-Mormon that they are. That is so great, and it makes me think about my experience within the LDS faith. Daisy May also said, I'm still working on how to have compassion for the leaders of the church as I face things that seem deceptive or controlling coming from them. I'm in a place of nuance with a TBM spouse, so I'm attending. It's much easier with loved ones whose motivations I feel closer to. I have trust issues at the highest level of the church. Your musings in this episode will be on my mind for a while. Thank you. I have mixed feelings about this as well. Or on a local level, when you know the individual person in your community, it's easier to have compassion for them. And you want to think, at least in my mind, I want to think highly, and I want to have good thoughts about the people that I surround myself with. And so I try to give grace to them. But it's really hard to offer that same grace to leaders of the church. And when I say leaders, I mean on the global level, not just a local level. 70 and apostles, prophets, and such. And it's tough to recognize the harm that's being perpetuated and then offer grace. But they're people too. And I don't have a window into their mind to know whether they're believers or non-believers and abusing a system or just perpetuating harmful things that they were taught. There's lots of speculation that can go on there. And for me, I don't find it helpful to dwell on that because I don't have a good answer for it. And that sounds like a thought-stopping technique. So let me sit here with my thoughts for a sec, and I'll come right back to you. Okay, I'm back. No time passed for you. But as I've sat here thinking about it, a joke comes to my mind from Norm Macdonald. And I'm not going to say the whole joke, but the punchline is basically that Hitler's dogs loved him. And so the way I think I want to approach this, work in progress, as many of us are. I'm a work in progress too. I want to recognize their humanity and what unites us as people, but also recognize the harm that they perpetuate on members of the church. I can hold two ideas or two feelings in my mind that juxtaposed together, they really don't jive well. You can have the absolute love for someone and recognize that they have harmed you. And and that's how I come to some of my own personal relationships. And so I feel like that's the way I want to approach this. I think that this is going to take work, and I know it's not easy, but we can find compassion for their humanity, for the things that unite us as humans, but recognize the real harm that they have done. And that's kind of all I want to dwell on that thought, but it's a big one. Maybe I need to sit down and do some more thinking on it and do a proper couple of episodes on my thoughts on this. That was not the subject that I wanted to discuss today. I want to talk about unreliable narrators in literature and movies, and then use that as a jumping off point to explore and examine doubt, and why I think that the LDS Church has framed doubt in a very negative lens, but it actually is something that is so useful and helpful for us to explore our own thoughts and ideas and take ownership of our own faith. So I love movies, I love books and literature, and this is one of my favorite literary devices that takes a little bit of reflection after reading to really catch what's happening. So I'll talk about a couple. I'm not going to dive super deep into these, but I'm just going to give some examples of unreliable narrators and what they do to the story. The first one that I'll talk about is Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye. Excellent American novel. I really love, and I think I've quoted it a couple of other times on the podcast here, but Holden, he's like a grieving teenager with depression and trauma, and he's very prone to exaggeration and contradiction. Throughout the book, he contradicts himself and he lies regularly, and he presents himself in kind of inconsistent ways, and he looks at everyone else as being phony, and he talks about everyone else as being deceitful and not true, authentic versions of themselves, when he himself throughout the entire book is acting in this exact same behavior, and he's presenting himself in different ways to different people. What this highlights for me is, yes, he recognizes a lot of the things that he's commenting about and frustrated with, but then he fails to recognize them within himself. I listed the one example of calling everybody else phony, but then also lying himself. Another significant one, and spoilers here, he's dealing with the trauma of his brother's death, and his unreliability kind of mirrors like an adolescent confusion, and it's him trying to navigate his own trauma and find the truth about the world around him as a kid. And it's so fascinating to examine it through this lens of him also being a phony. There's another one that I loved, the novel Life of Pi by Jan Martel. This is it's interesting because it tells two versions of a survival story, and you know that clearly one of them is fantastical and one of them is probably realistically what happened. The whole story is runs these two narratives. You get these two different dual experiences of what's really happening. And for me, this unreliable version, this fantastical version, is one that people prefer. because it's full of metaphor and meaning. But the gritty reality version, if you will, doesn't have that meaning or metaphor attached to it. And so for me, this whole story examines the way we frame our own personal stories and how we spin them after the fact. So he's an unreliable narrator. He's clearly telling a fantastical version of what happened to him. But when you think about it and compare it to the real one, that's where you can uncover a lot of this meaning. So anyway, great book. The movie is also awesome. Another really interesting story to examine through the same sort of doubt lens, unreliable narrator lens, is the story of Dune. The movies just came out a couple years ago, and then I think last year for the part 2, and they're working on part 3. So this one, directed by Denis Villeneuve. The story is so fascinating. As many times people go sit through the whole movie, they watch the whole thing, and they see this grand sweeping tale of revenge and prophecies and fulfillment, but many people don't recognize that there's a lot more happening under the surface if you approach the story with just a little bit of doubt. The story, the way I view it, is a critique of the white savior narrative. When you approach it with just a little bit of doubt and you look at the way that Paul, Timothy Chalamet's character, the way he manipulates their myths alongside his mother to take advantage of a native people and use it to further his own ends and accomplish his own goals, and the abuse of other people that's happening right there in front of you. But if you're not paying attention, you completely miss it. I think there's an amazing sequence of events where the director, Denis, does an excellent job of framing this, where Javier Bardem's character, Stilgar, is talking to Paul, Timothy Chalamet's character. And regardless of how Paul responds, Stilgar views everything as a fulfillment of prophecy. But then you have this contrast. You go to Zendaya's character, Shani, and she doesn't recognize this as a fulfillment of prophecy. But literally anything Paul says and anything that he's doing, Paul and his mother actively are manipulating their beliefs for their own ends. All right, I've been chatting for a minute, and I had others that I wanted to talk about, but now I'm well into the episode and I haven't even talked about doubt yet. I love movies. I love stories. So you get me on something like this and I can just go and go and go. I actually wanted to talk about Fight Club a little bit too. And I wanted to talk about a few other unreliable narrators that, because they are unreliable, it makes the story so much more meaningful. So, why bring this up? When leaders of the church frame doubt as a negative thing, it does real harm to people's personal spiritual development. This phrase, doubt your doubts, comes from the talk in the October 2013 General Conference from Dieter Uchtdorf. And the talk was called, "Come Join With Us." And the phrase that he says is, "Therefore, my dear," this is a culmination of what he's been talking about through the talk. And this is kind of the thesis from what I understand of what he's trying to say. "Therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, my dear friends, please first doubt your doubts before you doubt your faith. We must never allow doubt to hold us prisoner and keep us from divine love, peace, and gifts that come through faith in the Lord Jesus Christ." I strongly disagree with this sentiment. And I've talked about it before, and the whole logical problem of doubting your doubts. But now I want to come at it from an angle of, this doesn't foster mature faith and mature belief. So I want to examine this in a healthier way. Why are doubts better for faith than not? So the way this is presented is clearly a thought-stopping technique. Doubt comes from a place of desire for more understanding. In my own experience with doubt and with my faith, I didn't start the journey of religious deconstruction because I wanted to sin or because I wanted to walk down a path that would lead me out of the church. I wanted knowledge. My doubt was there because I had gaps in my understanding and I wanted to know more, or things didn't make sense perfectly. And so I doubted my understanding of them. So I read more, I studied more, I researched more. Doubt was a jumping off point for understanding. I could go into the whole scientific method and how doubt is an integral part of proving what we know to be true or false. Doubt in a religious sense should be the exact same thing. It should be the tool, the mechanism that we use to prove our understanding of the world around us, to prove our faith. If the church were perfectly confident in the truth that it has, it would welcome doubt. It would say, question your beliefs, find answers to them, because we know we'd have the truth, and your answers, the answers you find here, will satisfy you. I think that it's telling that the faith says, doubt your doubts, don't look into your questions, rather than saying, explore them. We might not know everything, but we have a lot of goodness here. Those are two very different responses. And one shows a confidence in the faith, and the other, recommending a thought-stopping technique, hints at things being hidden. Don't look into the history of the church. Don't look into the historicity of the scriptures. Don't look into these things, because they will harm your faith. That's what this phrase is admitting to. There's an emphasis in the church of bearing testimony to things that we don't have a perfect knowledge of. Children are encouraged to go up under the pulpit and say, I know the church is true. I know that Jesus lives, and make these declarative truth statements without actually knowing, when those phrases are really a declaration of faith and hope in the face of a doubt. Faith is much, much more powerful if someone can say, I don't know for certain, or I have strong doubts, but I also have faith. I have questions about X, Y, and Z, but I also have faith in this. The core concept of faith is holding a belief even though you don't know that it's true. By definition, faith is a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding. And doubt shouldn't play a role to destroy it. Doubt should be a way to prove if your faith is accurate or not. Many of us in the religious deconstruction sphere were hit over the head by the realization that many of the narrators that we grew up with were unreliable. The stories, the myths that we were taught about church history and church leaders, about the Book of Mormon, they all came from an unreliable narrator. What that did to many of us, that realization that Joseph Smith was not a reliable source of information, was crippling to many people, myself included. But others can look at this same set of information and come to a wholly different conclusion. They can look at the many different accounts of the first vision, and this does not affect their faith. I don't want to say that someone can, that everyone has to come to the same conclusions that I come to, but it's not something that I could hold faith in any longer. Now, we could try to ascribe intentionality and motive to the reasons why we have these different versions and why the stories change over time. I want to compare the LDS response to doubt, specifically from Uchtdorf, the thought-stopping technique, to the passage in Mark 9, the story of healing the boy with the spirit. And the whole premise is a boy is brought to Jesus, that has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And Jesus calls everyone there that, says that they're faithless. And the phrase, and this is from the NRSV version, verse 24, immediately the father of the child cried out, "I believe, help my unbelief." And then verse 25, when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You spirit that keep this boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." When Jesus was presented with doubt, the response wasn't, "Stop thinking about it." In this story, the supplicant, the father trying to get his son healed, says, I don't believe. I need help to believe. I have doubts. And then Jesus, in the scripture, casts out the spirit. This should be the template for doubts within a religious institution. A religious leader should be okay saying, "I don't have all the answers. I also have doubts, but I have faith," and then expound upon the things that they have faith about. The response should never be, "Don't look into it. Stop thinking about it." A couple of episodes ago, I made reference to a received morality and an adopted morality. The same idea pertains to spirituality. You can have a received spirituality and an adopted spirituality. And the received spirituality are the things that we are taught and we're instructed when we enter a faith or when we're born and our parents are teaching us these things. An adopted spirituality are things that we have personally examined and we have determined for ourselves that they are what we believe in. If we don't experience doubt and think critically about the received spirituality that we have, none of our faith can ever convert over to adopted spirituality, where the adopted spirituality would be the more personal convictions that we hold. As we're going through this religious deconstruction process, whether that leads us out of the church or to stay in, it is such a useful question to ask about each of our beliefs, about the church, about God and Jesus and everything that we hold spiritually, to say, what did this once mean to me and why was that important? You could even ask, is there anything that I still want from a belief like this? That doesn't mean you have to hold the same idea, but recognizing why those things were important can help us get a better understanding of who we are, what's important to us, and what our values are. Doubt is the only way to take an inherited belief and choose it and change it into a chosen faith. If the institution says you can never doubt, then they only want people who will blindly follow their counsel without ever thinking critically. This does not have to lead people out of the church. It is so unhealthy to frame doubt in this way and say that it is not a part of faith, when doubt is an aspect of our daily lives. And doubt as a term is kind of broad. Part of this might just be approaching things with skepticism, holding onto concepts loosely so we can examine them and determine if they're right or wrong, or if they apply to us or not. I held so tightly to my faith that the church was literally true, that the scriptures were literal history, that the Book of Mormon, literal history, and that Joseph Smith's story, Joseph Smith's vision, and everything about church history was literally true. The miracles, everything. And the foundation of my faith in the LDS church was built upon those things being literally true. Because if they weren't literally true, then there was no reason for me to follow the faith. So when I learned that Joseph Smith was an unreliable narrator, the foundation of my faith absolutely crumbled. Coming to beliefs and faith with skepticism and with doubt isn't about trying to find a way out of the religion. It's about deepening your own beliefs. And if that search for truth leads you to another faith, or leads you to a different form of spirituality, or no spirituality at all, that's completely okay. If it leads you to stay right there where you are in the LDS church, that's okay too. The practice of doubting our beliefs and being skeptical will deepen our self-awareness and make sure that we're choosing our beliefs and our faith with intention. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. I was a little rambly. I got distracted by some movies at the beginning, but that's very much in character for me. I love movies and shows and books and all forms of stories. So I apologize that I rambled on for a little bit longer. Doubt is not the enemy to faith. Doubt is how you strengthen it and prove it to be founded in something worthwhile or not. If a faith, if a belief, if a story, a history can't stand up to doubt, then maybe it shouldn't stand at all. What I'm encouraging from this for a believer, if there's a believer listening, it's not to say that the church should go away. I want the church to become a healthier, more mature institution. What if instead the church sat down with a doubter, walked through the issues, and gave the reasons why someone still believes? How much healthier, how much more supportive and loving would that approach be? Thanks for sticking around to listen to the episode. I apologize for getting this one out late. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and so I recorded this on the same day that I posted it, and I wasn't able to schedule it ahead of time. So I'll try to be a little bit more prepared in the future, but sometimes life kind of gets away from you. So wherever you find yourself out there, running through the car wash after all the spring rain to get your car looking nice again, I hope that you have an excellent day.